Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we are just talking.
Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to thank you for if you've liked these episodes, that you click the like icon and click the subscribe icon. And then if you want to get your reminders every week when a new episode drops, you click that bell icon.
Each week, we're going to be talking about the lectionary, the gospel lectionary reading for the upcoming weekend. And we'll be talking about those passages in the context of love and inclusion and justice. And our hope is that our talking will be just talking in the sense of justice, but that something that we say during this time will also inspire all of us to do more than just talking.
So this week we are in the Gospel of John, chapter 9. And let me just say this, that if you haven't picked up on it already, Herb and I struggle with the Gospel of John. And so it was great that we decided to do this video cast right at the time the lectionary is having us spend a lot of time in John. Um, and tonight's passage is definitely one that gives us a lot of pause and makes us think and wrestle about what John is trying to do here. And so I think you'll see that as we move through it. And yet we, as always, attempt to redeem things as much as we can, and hopefully give you some good thoughts that you can take into your weekend, especially if you're teaching or preaching this passage. So,
That's right.
yeah, Herb, why don't you get us started and
Well,
dig into this?
the first thing that I want to say is that John chapter 9, it has such a horrendous history of being used by Christians to do harm to the Jewish community, and we're going to get into that. But I want to say first and foremost that this chapter is not about Jesus. It's
Hmm.
it's it's about it's the Protonastic Johannine community's evaluation of the Pharisees. It's their explanation of why there's friction there, and it's an assessment and a sentencing against Pharisees, against the Jewish leaders, and against the well, it's awfully sloppy. The translation just says Jews in general.
Hmm.
And that's why it's been so harmful.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that benefits repeating that you're really, what you're looking at is you're looking at a proto-Gnostic John going against uh, Pharisaical, rabbinical Judaism in this passage, more than John is trying to um, exalt the person of Jesus specifically, or
Mm-hmm.
the gospel message of Jesus that we see in the other synoptic gospels. John is having an argument. He's making an argument, and he's setting up an enemy
Mm-hmm.
to his proto-Gnostic gospel in the Pharisaical Judaism, and unfortunately throws the entire Jewish people under the bus unnecessarily.
Yeah, I love how you said that, Todd. This isn't a chapter where the author here lifts up Jesus.
Right.
This is a chapter where the author takes a pot shot against somebody. And this time it's against a specific community. I do think it's important to kind of, excuse me, to do kind of a chronology here. I understand there are those out that there's a debate out there. If the Gospel of John was not, if the Johannine community out of which the Gospel of John was birthed, if they were not proto Gnostic, they at least wrote a gospel that was vulnerable, extremely vulnerable to being used by later Christian Gnosticism. But early, even proto Gnosticism came out of Jewish Gnosticism. And what we're seeing, I want to remind folks here that what we're seeing in this chapter is if well, the Pharisees, they evolved, the Pharisaical Judaism would evolve into rabbinic Judaism, just the way that proto-Gnosticism would evolve into Christian Gnosticism later. And rabbinical Judaism had deep issues with Gnostic Christianity, but not just Gnostic Christianity, even Gnostic forms of Judaism. I think it is much healthier to read John chapter 9, not even though it's sloppily written or at least sloppily translated, it's not a battle between Christians versus Jews. This is between Gnostic Christians and anti-Gnostic Jews. These same Pharisaical Judaism and the religious leaders that are mentioned here, they would have taken just as much issue with Jewish Gnosticism as they did Christian
Right.
Gnosticism. It was only as Christianity practiced Gnosticism that this school of Jewish thought would have taken issue with it. When we get to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's a classist thing where, I'm sorry, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's a classist thing where the elites are against the Jesus community. Here, it's all of Judaism, and it's just not fair. It's not fair, and I don't think it's historically accurate. I think it's much more a debate, again, between a Pharisaical Judaism versus Gnosticism in all its forms, whether Jewish or Christian. And lastly, there's just been so much historical damage done to the Jewish community by Christians because of this chapter.
Right. That's right.
It's incredibly anti-Semitic.
Yeah. I mean, and we have seen this. I mean, you see the direct implications of that throughout Crusades. You see it in the Protestant Reformation. There's a strong anti-Semitic strain, and you're seeing it today in Christian nationalism, where it continues to raise its ugly head. Where again, you can have philosophical, theological disagreements with anybody. You have the right to have those type of disagreements, but when you throw an entire ethnicity or race under the bus, you've totally you've moved into complete negligence and bullying that is completely outside the scope of the Gospels. And I really appreciate her pulling this part out in his study on John 9 this week, because it really just makes it shows the roots of this anti-Semitism very strongly here. And words matter. They really do matter. And when you're trying to relate to other people, you need to take your words seriously. And it's just not taken seriously here in this passage.
Christians don't need to demonize the Jewish community in order to lift up Jesus. Matter of fact, we would do well to listen to the Jewish wisdom out of which Jesus grew and was in perfect harmony with.
We would have a whole lot more understanding of what Jesus really cared about. And let's be clear on this. And Herb and I are in agreement on this, is that the Jesus that we're much more comfortable with is the materialist Jesus, the Jesus who is very concerned about flesh and blood matters in the day in which he lived, and caring about the needs of people where he was in his time and place. And he was very much a gospel messenger to the people in AD 30 than he was some Gnostic mystic teaching some kind of secret knowledge that generations can believe in and get access to special access into paradise. Jesus has always been about the material world in the present, and that is so crucial to understand in light of, as we continue to spend time in John, seeing John really portray a very different Gnostic approach to Jesus.
Yeah, it's a Gnostic version of Jesus, where Jesus came to share knowledge that leads to salvation, which a lot of Christianity today is very Gnostic in that sense,
It
rather
is.
than a Jesus who came to liberate and to bring change and to establish justice, to use language from the Hebrew prophets, the minor
Mm.
prophets.
Mm. Well, let's get into the passage a little bit more and just see what
Yeah,
we can
yeah.
see and
How about that who sinned question? You got anything on that?
listen, this is yeah, I that whole thing that starts off with Jesus, with people asking Jesus, who's the one at fault for this man being born blind, he or his parents? And then Jesus saying it was done so that God's glory could be revealed. This is
Horrible. Bad Jesus.
if you're like me, you've had problems with that verse for years, even if you didn't understand those whole Gnostic materialist debate going on. It's a horrible statement. It's a horrible statement for Jesus to say. And again,
Bad
it's so
Gnostic
important.
Jesus.
Hmm?
Bad Gnostic Jesus.
it's it is just this is the quintessential and evidence of what John is trying to do, because this is not about the man at all. The man is now being simply used to reveal the mystical truth about
Gnosis.
Jesus, so you can
Right.
have that special gnosis knowledge that gets you access to the kingdom of heaven. So the man is simply a puppet in the hands of Jesus to accomplish his purpose of saving the world through gnosis.
Yeah, it's dehumanizing the man who was born blind and just using him as a tool for your own theological aims.
Right. I mean, and this is the frustrating thing is this happens throughout the entire passage of chapter 9. Is Jesus in this passage is using the man to accomplish his purposes, and the Pharisees are trying to utilize him and to accomplish their arguments against Jesus, and this man who simply was trying to live and experience life the best he could, and who, at least according to the story, does receive his sight back, now becomes this pinball being bounced back and forth between everybody trying to accomplish their theological objectives through him.
And Christians don't do that today, do they, Todd?
No, not at all. No, we've so evolved out of that. We never make people into issues. Never. I mean, look
Yeah.
at what we do with LGBTQ people. In fact, so often I hear people talk to me about the LGBTQ issue.
Right.
It's not
Right.
about people, and it's not about ever wanting to talk to an actual gay man or a transgender woman. It is about wanting to talk about the theological ramifications of the LGBTQ issue. And
And too
again, it's like,
often.
do you have the special gnosis on the LGBTQ issue? Because it's all about the right belief about the issue that's going to save you. It's not about how you actually treat LGBTQ people.
And even well-meaning folks who have an affirming, well, I'll speak to me. I'll speak about me. I think that's safer. Even I can even have an affirming theology in regards to the LGBTQ community. I can have an affirming, celebrating, you know, progressive theology there, and still fall prey, if I'm not careful, to using people to prove even that theological argument.
Mm, mm.
You know what I
And
mean?
yeah, absolutely. I think
Like I can be on the
there
right
is
side of the issue and still dehumanize the very people that I'm arguing for if I'm not careful. I
yeah,
can
and I
do
think
what's happening here in John.
I think you can say that that some folks in Black Lives Matter movement and folks in the LGBTQ movement would say that sometimes the people who get most in the way are
Are the allies. Yeah.
the woke
Mhm.
allies who are taking their selfies and making their social media posts to prove how woke they are, but are actually not advocating and engaging in activist work to actually see change happen.
What we see happening in this story is that this gentleman is put in harm's way to prove a point.
Yep.
And we need to be careful, regardless of what the justice issue is, that we as allies, we don't use the people that are being harmed by the injustice as tools that cost them on a personal level. We don't bring more harm to them in trying to be an ally toward their liberation. In other words, what I'm trying to say is we don't we'll use LGBT as the example. We don't use LGBTQ people in order to prove LGBTQ affirmation, because we put them in religiously harmful and liable environments when we do that does significant harm to them as a human being. We sacrifice them in order to bring people over to a theological side. And even though that theological side is the right side, in my opinion, we need to be careful not to use whomever we're defending the way this blind man gets used in this story.
Yeah, no, it's so well said. And we constantly have to be on guard against our own ambition and our own desire to look good in the eyes of others. The temptation to use people is always there, and we have to constantly fight against that. It's very well said.
Yeah, I think too of the children who are taken pictures of in order to raise funds for organizations that are maybe doing some good things in those regions, but they're using people, dehumanizing people in order to. I mean, there's all kinds of applications we could go with this.
Yeah, I think so, and this passage is just again ripe with that taking place. Again, in the way that Jesus is portrayed. Jesus is
it's not the best light he could have been portrayed in.
No, it leaves him doing exactly what we said we shouldn't do in using other people, and it's just truly unfortunate to see how this passage unfolds in that light.
The next thing that bumps up, Todd, I don't know if you want to move forward or not. I know our time is limited, but the issue of the Sabbath. This would, to me, this is another kind of bell that goes off of my head. Ding, 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 ding. This isn't against Christians versus Jews. This is against, because a lot of early Christians were Jewish and they still kept the Sabbath. This is an issue between Gnostic, Proto-Gnostic Christians and non-Gnostic Judaism, and and because remember the Gnostics, they were all about liberating our good souls, our spirits, from our material world of pain and suffering. And the Sabbath itself, it was about physical kind of enfleshed, rest. It was the material resting of our bodies, and from physical labor that every seventh day, and therefore, I mean, it would have fallen under the category of those things that the Gnostics, Jewish or Christian, would just not have valued the same way that others would have valued. What do you need to defend a blind man for? Let's just show the gnosis. What do you need to worry about the Sabbath for? We need that spiritual rest, not the physical rest. We need to spiritualize everything.
Yeah. And that's, I don't think I can really add much to that, because I think you've nailed it. It's just, again, just one of those very material versus Gnostic ways of looking at things.
Absolutely. And again, the only point there for me is that this is just a reminder, a little bell ringing saying, hey, here's one of those Gnostic issues again. I mean, the Sabbath is not that much of a point of contention in the other Gospels.
No, and Jesus seems to honor the Sabbath in the other passages in the Synoptics, and so this is the only place where he seems to. The criticism is that the criticism by the Pharisees is that he's taking the Sabbath lightly, and John doesn't seem to be concerned in defending that because, like you said, it's not important to the Gnostic way of viewing things.
Right. I mean, all of the really strong Jesus anti-Sabbath narratives are in the Gospel of John. You have the man at the pool of Bethesda who was told to take up his bed and walk on the Sabbath. That becomes a big, you know what I'm saying? And there's a little bit of that in the other Gospels. I don't want to say that it's not there at all, but it's not there in any measure the way that it is in John.
Right. Yeah, there's the difference between a reforming Jesus, a Jesus who is inviting people to consider reforms about practices and teachings, versus, because this is very much as again, Jesus did not come to bring a new religion. He came to be a reformer to the existing religion and to be a liberator to a society under oppression. And so he would be addressing anything that seemed to be oppressive. And there was certainly, in the ways that Sabbath was being kept, as we read about it in the other Gospels, that there were oppressive ways that Sabbath was being used to hold people down. And Jesus would speak to that because he would want Sabbath to be returned to something of rest. But in this case, it's not. This is all about, again, and Sabbath being such an important core practice of people in Judaism. John seems to be attacking this along with attacking Jewish people for their rejection of Jesus that he's setting up.
I think it's much more life-giving to envision the early Christian movement and even the historical Jesus as spearheading a Jewish renewal movement, not like you said, birthing a new religion, but a Jewish renewal movement, leading people back to what they define fidelity to the God of the Torah looks like within Judaism. And so therefore that makes perfect sense why the Sabbath, when it comes up in all of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus it's renewing, as you say, reforming, it's refining, it's bringing it back into a life-giving practice. It's not anti-Sabbath the way we get
it's
into.
Not rejecting it.
Right. Yeah. How about where they say their defense of Jesus being the right one is that he can do mystical miracles, the magic Jesus.
Yeah. Again, so counter to what we see in other places where Jesus is inviting, in saying that his work of healing, of restoring people, is a work that others are invited into, even if they don't have the miraculous gift that the disciples are invited to follow him and to do the same work. Whereas here, he's the only one. He's the magic man. He's the one that you got to believe in. And it's not about what he was doing for people. It was the magic show.
Which is very Gnostic in its flavor.
Yes.
I mean, in the other Gospels, I'm reminded of, and I'm just now thinking about this, but when John the Baptist was in prison and he came to, he sent his disciples to Jesus saying, "Are you the one, or do we search for another?" The testimony back was not, "I do miracles." Certainly you could interpret the answer that way, but it's not just that. It's more liberation. Look at what these people are suffering. They're being liberated. They're being set free. And the good news is preached to the poor. That's concrete liberation stuff, justice stuff happening there as the testimony for who Jesus was, rather than, well, he can do miraculous things. And honestly, Todd, I am much more comfortable in the 21st century. Are we living in the 21st century? Yeah, the 21st century. Sorry. I am much more comfortable in our worldview, cultural context today saying the reason I follow Jesus is because of the justice focus that I see, the liberation that I see in the Jesus story, the love, the golden rule, those types of things, rather than Jesus actually historically really did supernatural, natural law bending and violating miracles. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's harder to, if that's what you're following Jesus is based on, that's a deck of cards ready to fall. You
That's
just
right.
need a couple science lessons and you're in trouble.
That's right. Yeah, it is. And you see so
It's
many
fragile.
folks, right. And you see so many folks who grew up in the Christian faith reject the Christian faith exactly on those grounds because they don't see supernatural Jesus showing up and doing supernatural things now. You don't see that in society. You don't see
Mm-hmm.
that in your day-to-day life. But if the gospel of Jesus was about liberating people and restoring people, well, man, there's Christians and people of all faith traditions all over the place doing that type of work today, and
Mm-hmm.
that's very much a Jesus-centered gospel, whether or not they espouse Jesus as their Messiah. It is very much in line and in harmony with that work.
Yeah.
We
I
know
think
that
of how,
Gandhi said, I'd be a Christian if it wasn't for this all these Christians who talk about, and I'm clearly paraphrasing, but who aren't connected, who aren't in line with Jesus' liberation, but have turned him into something else, something like a Gnostic Jesus.
mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah,
clearly. Go ahead.
and Gandhi had his problems. You know what I mean? He was clearly a misogynist. So he's not like, we're not holding him up on a pedestal and saying, oh, look at Gandhi the way that's normally done. But MLK did remind us that of, the best Christian to have lived in the last century wasn't even a Christian, and he was
Right.
talking about Gandhi. And that's a heavy paraphrase too. All of those references I don't have. But yeah, and just the justice work. And I don't know how much time we want to spend on this, but I mean, once Christianity evolved to the place where the teachings of Jesus became problematic for its social standing in society,
Mm.
its social location, then you see a vast change in what find what being a Christian was. It was no longer do you endeavor to follow the ethical teachings of Jesus, because those are now problematic for our social location.
Right.
Now we're privileged, now we're property, now we're powerful. Whenever that happened, some people blame Rome, whatever, whenever that happened,
Mm-hmm.
it now becomes what defines whether you're a Christian or the creeds. You know, are you do you
That's right.
believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, crucified
Right.
under Pontius Pilate, raised on the third day? Those are great story narrative elements, but there's only one of the gospels in our canon that has the virgin birth in it. So I guess the other three thought you could be a Christian and not even know about
That's
the
right.
virgin birth. That's
That's right.
problematic. Plus, it's really hard to prove that virgins can conceive today. And
True.
and 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 if you skip from the virgin birth all the way to Jesus's death, then you essentially ignore all of those ethical teachings that you don't have to be confronted by anymore. So
That's right.
again, that's where this miracle stuff comes in. It's much easier to believe in Jesus because of the miracles that Jesus did. Because I, as a privileged, white, straight, male, cisgender, middle class, my social location isn't threatened by believing in a miracle working Jesus, my faith resting on that. If I take a hard look at the ethical teachings of Jesus in the other gospels, and I want to follow Jesus because of the actual teachings of Jesus and the way that Jesus called me to live, well, then I've got to reevaluate everything. I've got to
Yeah.
reevaluate my standing in society and what I'm participating. I mean, it changes everything top down, bottom up, outside in, inside out. It's it's incredibly, the Jesus of Mark, Matthew, and Luke are incredibly problematic for Christians in privileged social locations. The
Right.
Gospel of John is incredibly convenient and helps
Hmm.
us sleep better at
Hmm.
night.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's everybody, most everybody the evangelical experts all say the best book to read about the best gospel for Jesus is John, because it fulfills that evangelical Gnostic uh, priority, and it
Yeah.
leaves everybody comfortable where they are, and it just means I can go on and live my day-to-day life in this material world, and this material world doesn't matter. Hey, it's all going to burn, so whatever. I'm just gonna live this life, and but I've made my commitment to Jesus. I've said the prayer. I've confessed my sins, whatever those are, and I've made myself right, and so I'm going to heaven. And we even hear the preaching. So much of the preaching is you're not saved by what you do. Your salvation does not come by what you do. Salvation is believing in the name of Jesus. That is a completely Gnostic statement, but it is at the
Totally
heart
Gnostic.
of Christian evangelicalism. And we don't
And all you have to do is
and we
and
call go and we
no, go ahead, go ahead.
call doing our work, we call that legalism. That if we think we're going to be saved by actually loving people and caring for other people and serving in the soup kitchen or marching in a protest or working in local government issues to make things more equitable, that doesn't save you, the evangelical Gnostic religion says. That is all works. You're only saved because you believe in Jesus. But what the other gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke say is that salvation happens communally, happens together,
Mm,
and therefore we
mm,
are all working
mm.
together towards our collective salvation. And
I
it
love that.
requires all of us who are able to work and to do that. That is the gospel, is that we are all in this together, and everyone who can lift a shovel or or wash somebody's back is everybody. We need everybody in this work,
Yeah.
because it is all of us together.
Hmm. As Reverend Jackie Lewis often says, uh, if there is such a thing as salvation, none of us are saved till all of us are saved.
That's
I
right.
love that statement. I love that
That's right.
statement. But I was going to say a minute ago, when I got so excited, I almost interrupted you again. I'm sorry. I just get so excited. There are times where you just hit the go button with something that you're saying for me, and it's hard just to hold the throttle back. But it gets even worse. It's not just a contrast between endeavoring to follow the ethical teachings of Jesus and making the world a safe place for everyone versus believing in the name of Jesus and that's what saves you. It's not
Hmm.
only that contrast. If you grew up in some of the religious circles that I did, you don't even have to continually believe. You just have to believe in Jesus
Right.
once
Right.
and you're always, you know what I'm saying? So it's not
Yep.
even it's so minimalistic. I had a friend that used to say, man, being a vegan will change your life more than being a Christian. Yeah.
That's pretty funny. Uh,
Anyway.
yeah,
So,
nobody. Let's let, try to sell to the American evangelical public. Uh, Join us in hard work in order to save everyone. Jesus calls
yeah.
us to that. Yeah, see how much traction that gets.
And it gets few followers and it gets very little financial support. I tell you what brings in the coffer, fills up the coffers and the religious, offering plates is helping the privileged, the powerful, and the propertied sleep better
Mm.
at night. Those kinds,
Mm.
that gospel and those kind of sermons, man, people will pay for that all day long. It's like crack. It's like a drug that, it
Yeah.
just, it's what Karl Marx called the opiate.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah. So lastly, and I mean, I'm just looking at the clock here. We're coming up on that hour. I don't think we've ever gone for a full hour yet, so we might do it tonight. But it's not just the Jewish community that's thrown under the bus here. It's
Yeah,
blind people too.
yeah,
And that really concerns me also.
yeah. I mean, just to then at the end of everything to say, for Jesus to say, uh, no, the real blind people are the Pharisees and the Jews. They're the ones who are blind. To after restoring a man, then then to use a person's experience, their life experience, and to use it in a slanderous way against a different group of people.
Yeah, a
Uh,
pejorative way to
it's
take blindness and use it pejoratively.
yes,
Yeah.
it's just it's just so, again we talked about how there's different ways to frame arguments and to do things where you don't throw individuals or cultures under the bus. And again, here,
It's a
just
very ableist evaluation at the very end.
yeah,
I mean, we don't have to characterize our opponents or adversaries or our nemesis. We don't have to characterize them as blind,
no,
because what that does is that says that being blind is a negative and it's a less than. And that does significant harm to people who encounter our world through blindness. We
right,
don't have to assign moral value
that's right,
to the ways that we encounter the world and then take those ways and use it as a slur against another community. So not only, I mean, you're damaging two communities there. You're not only damaging the Jewish community, you're damaging the blind community. It's very
yeah,
ableist, as if people who physically see with these,
right,
they're the good guys and the blind people are the bad guys.
yeah.
That's incredibly ableist and harmful.
And again, but it feeds into that Gnostic understanding of everything in the material world is bad,
Mhm.
and being blind is a curse. It is a uh, it means that you are less than. It means that you are more, like you said, morally inferior in some way. It is the epitome for a Gnostic person of showing how the material world goes wrong,
Mhm.
and is irredeemable, and instead, um, it's all about knowing in whom you believed. And the end of the story, of course, is the man comes to Jesus and he says, "I believe in you." You know, again, that is more his being may his receiving his sight is not what it's about. It's about when he makes that testimony
Mhm.
that I
Mhm.
believe in you. Um, and the criticism against Pharisaical Judaism is they don't believe, and therefore
They're
we're going to
blind.
they're blind.
Yeah.
And
It's the way the old cartoons, only the villains wore eye patches. You know what I mean?
it's true.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
therefore, and when I was a kid, every time I saw someone with an eye patch, I was afraid of them. As a result,
yeah,
they were the bad guy.
yeah.
It's the same
We've
narrative. It's the same narrative trick, but again, it's dehumanizing.
and Herb, and I don't know that it's necessarily the people who are watching this, but I can hear a whole section of an audience saying, "Man, you guys are making a big deal about this stuff. This is like, I don't even see this here. I don't even see it. It's not even there." I can tell you that if a person whose faith is in Judaism reads this passage, it is so obvious that it's
Mm-hmm.
anti-Semitic. And I could tell you that a blind person hearing or reading this passage with Braille would be so offended um,
Mm-hmm.
by
Mm-hmm.
this passage, and because of and could tell you
People,
all the ways that they've experienced insults and harm done to them by people who probably believe in the Jesus of John chapter 9.
yeah. Yeah. And what it tells me is that somebody that says we're making too big a deal out of this stuff, what it tells me is that that person just simply hasn't stopped to listen to the communities that are harmed by these by passages like these. You know, John gets into anti-Judaism a lot in that, much more than the other gospels do. But I will say the ableism in the gospels, all four of them are chock full of that stuff. We
Mm-hmm.
need to be very careful with the healing stories because of the harm. A really great book is a book called The Disabled God, and I'm trying to remember. Um, it's toward a theological a liberative theology of disability is
Mm.
what the subtitle is, but I'm trying to remember who the author is. But I'll shoot it to you, Todd, and you can put it in the
Yeah, we'll post
description
it.
again. Of I should have included it because I knew we were going to be talking about this subject tonight. But that's such a great book, such a
Mm.
great book.
Mm. So I think this type of stuff matters because like Herb you said, and this is the main point of your blog this week was, we can tell the story better, we can tell better, we can tell these things better. There's so much that we can still glean from the story of Jesus, but knowing what we know now, and because again, you and I would believe in a God who is progressively revealing more and more that we about our world, about how we understand each other, how we care for one another. We have progressed beyond so much of what we read in the scriptures. The scriptures are not infallible. The scriptures are are testimonies of where people were 2,000 years ago, and we can still learn from them, but we can tell them better and in more
Mm-hmm.
holistic and more life-giving, healing ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, really, there are chapters in the Gospel of John that I can reclaim and bring something good out of, despite the
Yeah.
problematic nature initially. But John chapter 9, all John chapter 9 says to me is, as Jesus followers, I need to be way more responsible than this author was in
Mm-hmm.
how I tell the Jesus story.
Yeah,
I could do better. We can do better, and we need to do better.
absolutely.
That's all I got this week, Todd.
All right,
That's a
man.
lot.
Well, we will, as always, try to do better, and as we keep going along. But we're having fun doing this. We hope you guys are enjoying this, and we really hope that in your context, however this interfaces with your life and what your calling is with God, that's doing some good for you. And just wish you all the best as you continue to seek to follow Jesus.
Absolutely. Thank you all for watching this week. Remember to hit that like, that subscribe, and the notification button. You can find me, remember, at renewedheartministries.com.
And you can find me at toddjleonard.com and at my church website, glendalecitychurch.org. Wish you all the best. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.